Storytelling podcast. My name is Sherry, and I have the privilege of working on these podcasts and sharing stories from our community. We are coming to you from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, which is in the heart of Treaty 7 territory. This is the traditional territory of the Blackfoot, the Kaina, Piikani, and Siksika, the ancestral homeland of the Tsuut'ina Nation, and the Eehee Nakota nations of Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney, along with Métis Nation Districts 5 and 6. This land has welcomed Indigenous people and Inuit from across Turtle Island and settlers and visitors from around the world. Mohkinstsis, which is the Blackfoot word for Calgary, has been a gathering place for centuries, where people have come together for hospitality, for trade, to share their cultures, their music, their dances, and their stories. And it's in that spirit that we welcome you to the Storytelling Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Storytelling Podcast. This week, we have another fantastic artist joining us here for conversation and sharing their stories. They hold a MFA in sculpture from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and a PhD in cultural studies from Goldsmiths University of London in the UK. They are an artist working in the realms of art installation and public art, and they are also a curator working professionally across the world doing all kinds of fantastic things. Here to tell their story, it's Karen Tam. Hi, Karen. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Karen, you're working on some fantastic things here in the city of Calgary, as well as across the country, around the world. You've done some really beautiful installations and work. Before we delve into some of the specific things that are going on these days, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and your artistic practice?
Sure. So I'm a Montreal, Jojega-based artist, just mostly working in installations, but that can encompass so many things from like sculpture, textile, painting, drawing, video, sound works, etc. Anything that kind of interests me.
Yeah.
And I've been doing this for, I guess, almost 25 years now. And my research has really focused on the different forms of, I guess, constructions, imaginations of cultures and communities, specifically like the Chinese diaspora in Canada. So examples of works that I've done, installation-wise, are like where I recreate spaces of Chinese restaurants, Chinese Canadian restaurants, or opium dens, early Chinese Canadian art studios or photo studios, and other sites of cultural encounters. So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell what I do.
I love that phrase, cultural encounters, sites of cultural encounters. Can you expand a little bit on that? What does that mean to you?
So one of my first projects was really where I recreated Chinese restaurants. That comes out of my family's history. Parents, my uncle, aunts, grandparents who either ran a Chinese restaurant or worked in one. And just growing up in one in the 80s and 90s in East End, Montreal, there was a lot of, I guess, cultural encounters that happened, between like my parents and then the customers who were mostly Francophone Quebecers, and just seeing the interactions and sometimes the really challenging experiences of racism, basically, that I saw my parents faced. That kind of led me to, I guess, creating and using my art to talk about certain issues of discrimination and such. So when I say cultural encounters, I want it to be more thinking about meeting of cultures or languages as a conversation rather than, I don't know, like a battleground or such. Yeah.
You have a show that's currently on here in Calgary that I think falls into this cultural encounter and representation. It's called Sea of Clouds. Can you tell us a little bit about that installation work? How did that show come to be? And why Calgary? Why have you got it here?
So yeah, A Sea of Clouds. It's my current show at the Illingworth Kerr Gallery at AU Arts, and it's co-curated by Henry Hung Liu and Tak Pham. And the exhibition takes on as a starting point, basically the historical large-scale international spectacles of the world fairs and expositions. I'm looking specifically at the Chinese pavilions, or maybe I should say how China was displayed or had represented themselves in these fairs from, for example, its first unofficial participation in the 1851 London Fair to, say, the 2010 Shanghai Expo. And also was looking at the connections to the Chinese diaspora. Really, I really focus on the North American ones. So from like the 1893 World Columbian Exposition in Chicago, or the ones in Philly, San Francisco, Expo 67 in Montreal to Expo 86. So I was really interested in how a community or a country represented itself, how it chose the visuals, the objects, cultural artifacts, artworks, anything really to showcase themselves. And I guess like in certain cases where the Chinese government actually boycotted the world fairs, Chinese Americans themselves would fund and operate the Chinese pavilions or their own exhibitions as they saw the fair as an opportunity to promote cultural understanding, with the backdrop being a very discriminatory atmosphere of, the Chinese Exclusion Acts in both Canada and in the US. So that's sort of like the idea, right, for the show. And I was doing a lot of archival research the past 2 years and, kind of pulling everything together and thinking like for A Sea of Clouds, I wanted to, in a way, present or propose. Maybe I should say it's more like a proposal for, or imagine proposal for a future Chinese pavilion or a Chinatown pavilion. And and I guess I wanted to explore the politics of display, the construction of national or cultural identity in space, the material culture and such. And it was just wondering, like, what I wanted to do is pull certain elements from each World Fair that happened and bring them into the space at the IKG. So, it includes things like what you'll see in the exhibition. There's a big mural, there's a pavilion, there's a pleasure boat, there's piñata horses, and then there's other objects that I've, it's more like found objects or objects that I've gotten from souvenir shops in Chinatowns. And I guess the reason why Calgary, I guess several things. We're hoping to tour this show actually, starting first in Calgary and hopefully making its way east-west, right, to Vancouver because of Expo 86, and then, Montreal and everything in between. Because although only those two cities had the World Fairs, I think everywhere else, different towns and cities had their, in a way, version of a World Fairs, but maybe a smaller scale. So this idea of like showcasing your culture, I think that happens everywhere. And then I guess the other sort of Calgary connections is perhaps three things I can mention. One is the replicas of the terracotta army soldiers and horses. That's at the Calgary Chinese Cultural Center. And the center, I believe, had purchased them from the Chinese government after they were shown at Expo 86. So there's that connection. And then the other one is Bing Tom, Vancouver architect who designed the Hong Kong Pavilion for Expo 86. His papers and blueprints are actually held in the Canadian Architectural Archives at University of Calgary. And we're fortunate to be able to borrow a few of these blueprints for the show so people can actually see these archival documents. And then I guess the last thing is that Calgary had made a bid to host the 2017 World's Fair before they pulled out of consideration for the budget, I believe. So it could have been.
It could have been. Interesting. What really interesting connections that all bring things together here in this place. Very cool. Another realm that you work in is public art. And so I love to know from folks, what does the term public art mean to you? It means different things to different people. Can you tell us what public art means to you?
Sure. So for me, working in public art is quite recent for me, and it's been a really amazing experience because I'm just learning every time. And I think for me, public art, I guess I have the strong belief that art should be integrated into the experience of daily life. So that could be, you know, a small artwork that you really connect with, that you just have around the house, but also thinking about how else that it can be integrated into daily life, not just in the home, but perhaps outside as you're walking, down the street, or you're walking through a park. And I think public art, by occupying public spaces, it can be seen as a form of activism and engagement with community. In a way, you're bringing the art out to meet and to engage with the viewer, with citizens. And I think that in a way, how I came to public art is perhaps through my large scale and I guess immersive installations where I've many times have done collaborations with community or engaged, did a lot of public engagement. So it's allowed me to translate this experience of the experience of being inside an artwork, like an interior sort of artwork that's within a museum context or an art gallery context, to create and integrate artworks within like architectural and public spaces.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I think public art should, well, not should, sorry, for me, I see public art as being site specific, that's inclusive, that creates dialogue while engaging with like history, personal or community experiences.
I love that. What do you see as the unique challenges, and then also the most exciting things about
Oh.
working in public art?
So definitely when I started, and even now, I think every project is different and has its own challenges and amazing things about it. One of the things that I've learned is that what's different from, say, studio-based work is that you can't do it on your own. You need a team, you need to work with many partners, and basically you're working outside the studio. And I think that can be really amazing, because I think for me, like the process is different. It's longer, or it can be longer, and it requires different skill sets. So you need to bring experts in for certain aspects. And I guess the other thing too, having other considerations as audience, the type of audience. It might not necessarily mean the same audience that goes to museums or art exhibitions. It actually may be a broader, audience who, so you kind of think about who this is for, how they'll actually engage. And then I guess the other challenging thing is, and this was one piece of advice someone had told me, got a lot of experience in public art, is just plan for the worst. Anything that can happen will happen, like weather-wise or vandalism or anything. So that's something that you don't really consider when as an artist, when you put on like exhibitions in galleries and such. So, and I guess what I mentioned earlier about like one amazing aspect is that you're bringing art outside to meet folks, to meet the public. So yeah.
Yeah, that is a very cool thing about it. What are
Mm,
some of the favorite works that either you have created, or
mm.
perhaps that you've seen? You've worked all over the world, and have studied all over the world, and as well as in your own backyard and here in Calgary. What are some of the favorite things that you've seen out there that are created, and maybe
Uh,
why? If you've got a story as to what what
sure.
was it about them?
Okay. I mean, there's so many.
Yeah.
There's so many like fantastic works out there. Um, Maybe I'll pick a few. Like one of the first ones that I remember as a young artist.
Hmm.
Uh, maybe I'll pick two as a young artist. So one was Ed Pien's exhibition at Obro in Montreal, and I can't quite remember when this was. I was like in maybe CSHIP or first year undergrad, so late 90s maybe. And I think it was the first time, like as a young artist, you kind of just think your world hasn't expanded. So I think at the time I thought art was only painting or only sculpture. I didn't think that there was anything else. And Ed Pien's work, I mean, it's gorgeous. I've been a fan of his ever since then. It was drawings, but it was about ghost stories and the phenomenon of ghosts and such. And he transformed the space. So it wasn't just drawings, but you're just like in this whole different world. And I think that was one of the things that just really struck me, that, art doesn't have to just be something on the wall that's 2D. It can really like inform the corporeal experience, as your body is moving through the space. And so, yeah, and then the second one, I guess, is related too. It's around the same the same time, was Anne Hamilton's installation. I think it was called Mattering, that was touring, and I saw it when it was in Montreal, and it was this huge canopy across the gallery, red silk canopy, and it was just billowing, and underneath were live peacocks.
Oh,
Kind
wow.
of, and you could hear the clicking of their feet. And then there's a pole in the middle of the space. And when you look up, there's somebody perched up there and wrapping and unwrapping typewriter ribbon around their hands. And again, I was just like, Lord, just like, oh, wow, art can be something totally takes you, into this amazing out of body experience in a way. And so, yeah, those are two of the early ones. And then I guess if we have time, I can mention two more.
Yeah.
And so these are more recent. So last year, I did a research trip to San Francisco for the World Fairs project. I was just like, oh, I want to like San Francisco public art, all the works that were developed, created through the Federal Art Projects and the Works Progress Administration, right, in the 30s. And so one of the ones that I was just amazed by was the aquatic park, which is, I think, now maybe the Maritime Museum. And just everything about it was an artwork, was public art. There was paintings, there were murals, sculptures of animals. They were just really integrated the facade of the building outside and inside. And I should mention too that many of the artists of this aquatic project later went to work for the 1939 World's Fair in San Francisco. So there was like another connection there.
Cool.
Yeah, and I guess maybe the last one that I'll just mention, when I was living in Edinburgh, just for a short period of time, I came across the work of an Irish-Scottish artist called Phoebe Anna Traquair. She's part of the arts and crafts movement, and she did a lot of public art commissions. And one of them was to decorate in the 1890s, to decorate the interior of the Catholic Apostolic Church, which is now, I think, called Mansfield Traquair. And it was just like outstanding murals and paintings that she did, and you just really felt enveloped. So I guess for me, like, I seem to have picked all these works where it really, like, you're just fully immersed in the space and you're just awestruck.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And listening to you tell those stories, the thing I find really interesting is a lot of your work is now immersive work, where people come into the space, they're enveloped by the story and the artifacts and the art. And I found it really interesting that those were some of your formative ones back in Montreal when you were just starting out, and they still speak to you today. I love that.
Yeah.
You're going to be here in Calgary to do an upcoming artist talk at AU Arts. Can you tell us a little bit more about that event and what you're chatting about?
So, my upcoming talk at AU Arts, it's going to happen on November 19th, and it's actually going to take form as a conversation between myself and Henry Hung Liu, the one of the co-curators of the show, and it's moderated by Karen Tam about my current public art commission that's in development with the city of New Westminster in BC. The project or the work itself is going to be called Grove of Wild Bamboo and Sweet Peas.
That's a beautiful name.
Thank you. So it's actually going to be a fence for the Agnes Street Commemorative Park, which is actually on the former site of the Chinese Benevolent Society. So it's going to be a piece that takes inspiration from Chinese cutouts technique, and then bringing in archival imagery or stories from the community.
Beautiful. That's on November the 19th at AU Arts. Working here in Calgary, spending some time here working with other artists and AU Arts. Your home base is Montreal, but you travel all over. What is it about this Calgary space and place that inspires you as you look at the community and the work being done here?
I think it inspires me, like, not only through like the vibrant arts community, but also like the layered histories of the city, particularly since my work revolves around this, particularly within its like Chinatown and the contribution of this Chinese community. Figures like, and this is from a previous research project of Winifred Eaton, an early 20th century novelist, screenwriter of Chinese and British heritage, who spent years in Calgary, and the theater at University of Calgary is named after her and her husband, the Reeves Theater. So someone like her and her sister Edith, and they're considered the pioneers of North American Asian literature. So going back to Winifred, she represents for me like this complexity of identity and cultural expression that I think resonates in the city, and sort of finding the challenges of finding belonging between cultures. So I think it's themes that's still relevant in Calgary's like artistic and social and community landscapes. So yeah, this connection between Calgary's Chinatown communities, I think it brings forward like a really rich narrative and dialogue.
Thank you for sharing with us. Thank you so much for sharing your story about your practice and the work that you do and public art and all that you've got going on. We're really thrilled that you're presenting your work here in Calgary and that you joined us today. Thanks so much.
Thanks again.
And a big thank you to all those who are out there listening to this episode of the Storytelling Podcast. Thanks for joining us. I am Sherry and she is Karen, and this is the Storytelling Podcast. Signing off.